I always thought my marriage to Lisa was perfect, or at least as perfect as any relationship could be. We had been together for 8 years, married for 5, and things seemed stable. Sure, life wasn't always exciting, but we had a rhythm. Lisa was beautiful, charismatic, and smart. She had a way of lighting up a room and making everyone feel seen. She worked as an event planner, which suited her outgoing personality, while I managed an IT team, a quieter life but one I enjoyed. Looking back now, I wonder how I could have been so blind. It started subtly, as these things often do. Lisa had been going on more girls' trips over the past year, and her behavior around the house had shifted. She would come home late some nights, claiming her work events ran longer than expected, and she'd jump into the shower almost immediately. When I asked how the event went, she'd give me vague, generic answers that never seemed to match her usual enthusiasm for talking about work. I chalked it up to stress. Her job could be demanding, and she'd always been a little private about certain things. But then came the little tells. Her phone, which used to sit face up on the counter, was now always face down. She changed her password, something she'd never done before, and claimed it was for work security reasons. Lisa also started spending more time texting, with the occasional hushed phone calls she'd take in another room. I should have pressed her on it then, but I didn't. I trusted her. Or maybe I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. The first real crack in the facade came about a month ago, when Lisa went on one of her weekend getaways. She and her girlfriends had a standing tradition of spa weekends every few months. It was something I encouraged, thinking it was good for her to have time with her friends. That weekend, however, I bumped into one of her supposed travel companions, Samantha, at the grocery store. "Back already?" I asked casually, surprised to see her. Samantha looked confused. "Back from what? The spa weekend? You and Lisa." Samantha's face morphed into a mix of surprise and pity. "Oh, I wasn't on this one. I thought she said she was going with someone else." That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. I didn't confront Lisa immediately. I told myself I needed proof, something undeniable, before I could even consider accusing her of anything. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her things. It started small, like glancing at her open laptop or peeking at her emails. Then it escalated. I bought a small GPS tracker and slipped it into her car. I hated myself for stooping to such a level, but my gut told me I had to know the truth. When Lisa returned from the spa weekend, everything seemed normal, too normal. She greeted me with a big smile, kissed me on the cheek, and even brought back a bottle of expensive wine she claimed was a gift from one of her friends. But something in her demeanor felt off. There was a forced quality to her cheerfulness, like she was trying too hard to act like nothing had changed. I didn't say anything that night, but the next morning, I checked the GPS tracker. My stomach churned as I stared at the locations she had visited over the weekend. A spa? Nowhere near. Instead, the tracker showed her car had been parked at a secluded address on the outskirts of town. A private estate I didn't recognize. That's when the pieces started to fall into place. For the next few days, I couldn't focus on anything but that address. Every free moment was spent replaying the possibilities in my mind. Who lived there? Why would Lisa lie to me? My rational side told me there could be an innocent explanation, but the gnawing suspicion in my gut refused to let me rest. On Wednesday night, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I searched for the address online and found out it belonged to a sprawling, gated mansion rented out for exclusive events. A few clicks later, I stumbled upon a photography portfolio from a local event company. There it was, a gallery of photos featuring lavish parties held at that estate. The images showed expensive cars, well-dressed men, and women in barely their outfits. The kind of scene you'd expect in a music video or some shady underground club. I almost convinced myself I was overthinking. Maybe Lisa had a legitimate work event there. Maybe she was planning an event and didn't want to bore me with the details. But then a detail caught my eye. In one of the photos, taken at what seemed to be a recent party, a woman stood in the background. She was blurry, but her figure, her dress, it looked disturbingly like Lisa. My heart raced as I zoomed in, even though the image wasn't clear enough to be sure. I knew I needed more evidence. The next day, I called in sick to work and decided to do a little reconnaissance. It wasn't hard to find out when the next event was happening at the mansion. A few calls to the property's management, posing as someone interested in booking, confirmed there was a private gathering planned for Saturday night. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but I knew I had to go. That Saturday, I parked my car a block away and approached the mansion on foot. Security was tight, with guards checking a list at the gate. There was no way I'd be able to walk in, but I found a spot along the perimeter where I could see part of the house through the hedges. Through a side window, I spotted a crowd of people milling about inside. The scene felt surreal. Men in tailored suits, women draped in glittering gowns, and an undercurrent of something darker, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Then my blood ran cold. Lisa walked into view. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. Her hair was styled in loose waves, and she wore a red dress so tight it looked painted on. She wasn't acting like the Lisa I knew, reserved, professional, composed. She was laughing too loudly, leaning too close to a man I didn't recognize. He whispered something in her ear, and she threw her head back, her hand resting on his chest. I stood frozen, watching the woman I thought I knew turn into a stranger before my eyes. The man whispered something else, and Lisa nodded, taking his hand. Together, they disappeared into another room. I stayed for hours, my fists clenched, my body trembling with rage and disbelief. I saw enough to piece together the truth. This wasn't some work-related event. Lisa was living a life I knew nothing about. A secret life filled with dangerous people and depravity. I didn't confront her that night. Couldn't. My anger was too raw, too volatile. But as I drove home, my mind started racing with plans. If Lisa thought she could betray me like this and walk away unscathed, she had no idea who she was dealing with. The next morning, I couldn't even look at Lisa. She woke up late, sauntering into the kitchen with that same practiced smile on her face. She kissed me on the cheek as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't just witnessed her cavorting with strangers in that mansion. "Good morning," she said brightly, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "I was thinking we could do brunch today. Maybe that little place downtown." I stared at her, my mind screaming. How could she act so normal? How could she pretend everything was fine when she'd spent the night doing God knows what with God knows who? "I'm not feeling great," I mumbled, keeping my eyes on the newspaper in front of me. Lisa frowned, placing her mug on the counter. "Are you okay? You've been distant lately." I almost laughed at the irony. "I'm fine," I said, standing abruptly. "I just need some air." I left the house before she could say anything else. My thoughts were spinning too fast, fueled by the images of her from the night before. Lisa in that dress, leaning on that man, disappearing into a room that wasn't mine. I spent hours driving aimlessly, trying to figure out my next move. Part of me wanted to confront her right away, to scream at her, demand answers. But another part knew I needed to be smart about this. Whatever Lisa was involved in, it wasn't just a one-time thing. There were layers to this, secrets that went deeper than I could see. I needed to know the full scope before I made my move. By the time I got home, it was late afternoon. Lisa was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, her expression unreadable. "Feel better?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a small smile. "Sorry about earlier. Just a lot on my mind." Lisa hesitated, then nodded. "I get it. Work's been stressful for me too." She paused, as if debating whether to say more. "But you know you can talk to me, right?" The audacity of her words almost broke me. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. "Of course," I said evenly. "I know." That night, while Lisa slept, I dove deeper into my investigation. I checked her phone when she left it unattended for a moment, and while most of her messages seemed normal, there was one name that stood out, EV. There were no saved messages from this contact, but I could tell they'd been texting frequently. Whoever EV was, I was sure they were connected to that mansion. I searched through her emails, but she was too careful. Nothing suspicious there. Then I remembered the tracker I'd placed in her car. I pulled up the data and noticed another troubling pattern. She'd been to that same mansion multiple times over the past 3 months. Always on weekends she claimed to be with her friends. The evidence was mounting, but I still needed more. I needed something undeniable, something she couldn't explain away. And most of all, I needed a plan. Lisa thought she was the one playing a game. She had no idea I was about to turn the tables. The following week, I threw myself into gathering more evidence. Every free moment, every ounce of energy I had, was focused on exposing Lisa's double life. My anger simmered beneath the surface, but I kept it in check. If I lost control now, I'd never get to the bottom of this. I decided to trail her the next time she left the house. Friday evening came quickly, and Lisa was dressed to the nines. Tight black dress, heels that clicked with confidence, a spritz of perfume I hadn't smelled before. She kissed me on the cheek, barely making eye contact. "Don't wait up, okay? It's going to be a late night with the girls." I forced a smile. "Have fun." She walked out the door, and I waited exactly 5 minutes before grabbing my keys. The GPS tracker on her car guided me to the edge of town, back to that goddamn mansion. I parked a block away and watched from the shadows as she exited her car, waving at the gate guard like they were old friends. She was ushered in without a second glance. This time, I wasn't content to stay on the perimeter. I needed to know what was happening inside. I crept closer, careful to stay hidden, and found a side entrance used by staff. A catering van was parked nearby, and I waited until a server stepped out for a smoke. The second he walked away, I slipped in through the open door. Inside, the mansion buzzed with life. Music thumped softly, laughter echoed down the halls, and the air smelled of expensive liquor and something darker. Cigars, maybe, or opulence itself. I stayed in the shadows, blending in as best I could, and followed the sound of voices. Then I saw her. Lisa was standing in the middle of the room, her laughter ringing out like a bell. She was surrounded by men, all of them older, richer, and wearing the kind of suits that screamed power. One of them had his hand on her waist, his fingers grazing the curve of her hip. She didn't flinch. She leaned into him, smiling that coy, seductive smile I hadn't seen in years. My stomach churned, but I stayed frozen, my back pressed against the wall. I needed to see more. I needed to know exactly what she was doing here. Lisa and the man she'd been flirting with began to move, walking toward a set of double doors at the far end of the room. I trailed them at a distance, careful not to draw attention to myself. They entered the room and closed the doors behind them. I waited a beat, then crept closer. The music was louder here, but I could still hear muffled voices. Then came the unmistakable sound of Lisa's laughter, followed by something else. A man's low, murmured voice, too quiet to make out. My chest tightened as I realized the truth. This wasn't just a party. This was something else, something far more depraved. I didn't dare open the door, but I lingered long enough to catch snippets of conversation from others who passed by. Words like indulgent, exclusive, and untouchable floated through the air, painting a picture I couldn't ignore. Whatever Lisa was involved in, it was bigger than I'd imagined. I slipped out the way I came, my mind racing. As I drove home, I replayed everything I'd seen. The lavish parties, the powerful men, Lisa's transformation into someone I didn't recognize. It all pointed to one conclusion. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was part of something darker, something that made my stomach turn. The rage I'd kept bottled up for so long began to bubble over. She thought she could betray me, humiliate me, and keep me in the dark. But if Lisa wanted to play dirty, she'd soon find out I could do it better. This wasn't just about exposing her anymore. This was about revenge. After that night at the mansion, I couldn't get the image of Lisa out of my head. Her laughing, leaning into those men, completely at ease in a world of indulgence and corruption. She wasn't just unfaithful. She had become someone I didn't even recognize. The next morning, I confronted her indirectly, testing the waters. I needed to know how deep her lies went. "So, how was your night?" I asked casually over breakfast. Lisa didn't miss a beat. Oh, it was great. We went to this new wine bar downtown. You'd love it. They have this amazing Pinot Noir. Her lies slipped out so smoothly, so effortlessly, that I almost doubted myself. But then I remembered the mansion, the man's hand on her waist, and the double doors she disappeared behind. My blood boiled, but I forced a smile. Sounds nice. Maybe we should go together sometime, I said, watching her carefully. Lisa barely looked up from her coffee. Sure, maybe next week, she replied, already scrolling through her phone. Her nonchalance was the final nail in the coffin. She didn't feel guilty. She didn't feel remorse. She thought she could keep walking all over me and I'd stay oblivious. But she was wrong. I spent the next few days preparing my next move. If I wanted to take Lisa down, I needed to gather more than just evidence. I needed leverage. Something that would shatter the carefully crafted life she'd built in secret. Something that would ensure she couldn't weasel her way out with more lies. That's when I decided to dig into her connections. The name Evie on her phone haunted me. I had a feeling it wasn't just some random fling. This person was central to whatever Lisa was involved in. A quick online search for the initials and the mansion's address didn't yield much, but I eventually stumbled upon a local news article. It mentioned Enrique Valdez, a notorious figure in the city's underground, known for his lavish parties, his criminal empire, and his reputation as El Visconde, the Viscount. Enrique Valdez. Evu. It all clicked. Lisa wasn't just cheating on me. She was tangled up with a man who ran drugs, trafficking, and God knows what else. The realization hit me like a freight train. She wasn't just risking our marriage. She was putting our entire lives in danger. If Enrique Valdez was half as dangerous as the articles made him out to be, this wasn't just betrayal. This was a time bomb waiting to explode. But I wasn't scared. I was furious. I reached out to a friend from college, someone I hadn't spoken to in years but knew I could trust. Jake worked as a private investigator now, and if anyone could help me dig up dirt on Valdez and Lisa, it was him. Mike, this sounds messy, Jake said after I explained the situation over the phone. If Valdez is involved, you're not just playing with fire, you're swimming in gasoline. I don't care, I replied, my voice cold. I just need to know what's really going on. Jake sighed. All right, I'll see what I can find. But you need to promise me you'll be careful. These people don't mess around. Over the next few days, Jake fed me bits and pieces of information. Valdez's parties weren't just for show. They were fronts for illegal deals. A place where the wealthy and powerful indulged in every vice imaginable. And Lisa, she wasn't just a guest. She was a regular. She's been at almost every major event he's hosted in the last 6 months. Jake told me over the phone. And it gets worse. There's talk about her being part of the entertainment. I gripped the phone so hard I thought it might break. What do you mean, entertainment? You know what I mean, Mike. She's in deep. Whether it's for money, excitement, or some twisted sense of belonging, she's playing a dangerous game. Hearing those words out loud sent me over the edge. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. Lisa had crossed a line I couldn't forgive. But she wasn't the only one who could play dirty. If she thought she could betray me and come out unscathed, she had no idea what was coming. With Jake's intel, the scope of Lisa's betrayal became undeniable. She wasn't just a passive participant in Enrique Valdez's world. She was actively involved. What she was doing at those parties, I didn't fully know yet, but I had my suspicions, and they were worse than anything I'd ever imagined. I felt disgusted, humiliated, but above all I felt determined. If Lisa wanted to live this double life, I'd make sure she faced the consequences. Quietly, methodically, I began setting the pieces in place. The first step was creating a web of proof so airtight, no amount of excuses or lies could save her. Jake continued digging into her connections, while I focused on gathering personal evidence. I'd installed a hidden camera in our bedroom weeks ago, hoping to catch any signs of her infidelity. Now, I checked the footage religiously, and one night it paid off. While I was working late at the office, Lisa brought someone home. The man wasn't Enrique, but he had the same slick, dangerous aura I'd seen at the mansion. Lisa led him into our bedroom, laughing softly as she pushed him onto the bed. My stomach turned as I watched the video, their voices muffled but clear enough to confirm everything I needed to know. "Are you sure your husband won't come home early?" the man asked, his tone mocking. Lisa laughed, running a hand through her hair. "Mike, please. He's so boring he probably doesn't even notice when I'm gone." I paused the video, unable to watch anymore. Her words cut deeper than anything else. This wasn't just betrayal, it was utter contempt. She didn't just cheat on me. She saw me as nothing more than a fool to manipulate. I saved the footage, making copies on multiple devices. It wasn't just about confronting her anymore. This was ammunition, something I could use when the time came to expose her to the world she thought she controlled. The next step was infiltrating the mansion itself. I needed to see what went on behind those closed doors, to know exactly how far Lisa had fallen. I contacted Jake again, and together we devised a plan. Using one of his connections in security, I got a fake invite to Valdez's next event, a masquerade party scheduled for the following Saturday. The invitation came with strict rules. Wear a mask, don't bring a phone, and leave your real identity at the door. When Saturday arrived, I dressed in a black suit and donned the intricate, gold-trimmed mask the invitation required. As I approached the mansion, my nerves buzzed with a mix of anger and anticipation. Security at the gate scanned my fake ID, and after a tense moment, they waved me through. Inside, the party was even more opulent and debauched than I'd imagined. The air was thick with perfume and alcohol, the low thrum of music vibrating through my chest. Men in expensive suits lounged on velvet couches, while women in revealing gowns danced provocatively around them. Every corner of the room oozed excess and indulgence. I kept to the edges, my mask shielding my identity as I scanned the crowd. Then I saw her. Lisa was in the center of it all. Her mask tilted slightly as she laughed with a group of men. She wore a slinky silver dress that left little to the imagination, her body language flirtatious and confident. One man whispered something in her ear, and she smirked, trailing her fingers down his arm before leading him toward a private room. I followed them at a distance, careful not to draw attention. When they entered the room, I waited, my heart pounding. After a few minutes, I crept closer, peering through a small crack in the door. What I saw made my blood run cold. Lisa wasn't just cheating. She was participating in something far more twisted. And as I stood there, watching her with that man, and later with others, I knew there was no turning back. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war, and I intended to win. That night at the mansion changed everything. Watching Lisa's depravity firsthand, I realized I was no longer just dealing with infidelity. I was facing the complete destruction of the life I thought we'd built together. But it wasn't just the betrayal that fueled my rage. It was the arrogance, the shamelessness, the way she reveled in her deceit without a second thought for me. When I left the mansion, I knew the gloves were off. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. Lisa came home around noon, her hair disheveled, her dress slightly wrinkled. She kissed me on the cheek, the scent of unfamiliar cologne clinging to her like a taunt. "Sorry, babe," she said with a yawn. "It was such a late night. Wine bar turned into dancing, and we just lost track of time." Her audacity was almost impressive. I smiled, masking the disgust boiling beneath the surface. "Sounds fun," I replied. "You deserve a good night out." Lisa smiled back, entirely unaware of how close she was to losing everything. Over the next few days, I tightened my net. Jake had managed to dig up financial records showing large, unexplained cash deposits into Lisa's personal account. She wasn't just attending those parties for fun. She was being paid. Whatever she was doing for Enrique Valdez, it was lucrative, and the amount suggested she wasn't just mingling. I also uncovered her private email account. Hidden behind a password she must have thought I'd never guess. Inside were messages to Enrique and others, discussing party schedules, client preferences, and chillingly vague references to fulfilling agreements. Each email was a dagger, twisting deeper into the wound she'd created. But the most damning piece of evidence came from the tracker on her car. Jake had retrieved location logs showing visits not just to the mansion, but to several other properties linked to Valdez. One of them was rumored to be a site for far darker activities, illegal deals and human trafficking. The implications turned my stomach, but they also steeled my resolve. Lisa wasn't just cheating. She was complicit in something monstrous. I copied everything: emails, financial records, footage from the mansion, and the tracker logs, and stored it on multiple drives. I kept one hidden at home, another with Jake, and a third in a safety deposit box under a fake name. If Lisa or Valdez's people tried to cover their tracks, they wouldn't be able to erase what I had. The final piece of the puzzle was setting the trap. I knew confronting Lisa directly wouldn't be enough. She'd lie, manipulate, and gaslight her way out of it, just like she always did. No, I needed to expose her in a way she couldn't escape. A public, undeniable reckoning that would destroy not only her reputation but also her connection to Valdez's empire. I decided to strike at the next party. Enrique was hosting a private celebration the following weekend, and based on the guest list Jake uncovered, it would be one of his biggest events yet. Lisa had already confirmed her attendance, which meant I had the perfect opportunity to catch her in the act. But this time I wasn't going alone. Jake had secured a contact in law enforcement, an officer willing to bend the rules to bring Valdez down. Together, we planned a covert operation to raid the mansion during the party. My role was simple: get inside, gather real-time proof of what was happening, and signal the team when the time was right. The thought of facing Lisa again in that setting made my blood boil, but I pushed the emotion aside. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about justice, revenge, and reclaiming my life from the ashes of her betrayal. The night of the party arrived faster than I expected. Dressed in another suit and mask, I entered the mansion with my heart pounding. The atmosphere was electric, the air heavy with alcohol, perfume, and the faint undercurrent of something far more illicit. I spotted Lisa almost immediately. She was radiant, laughing and flirting like she didn't have a care in the world. Watching her act so free, so unburdened by guilt, reignited the fire in my chest. I clenched my fists, reminding myself to stay focused. Everything was in place. The evidence was ready, the authorities were waiting, and Lisa had no idea what was coming. As I watched her disappear into another private room, I reached into my pocket and activated the signal. The trap was set. The seconds after I activated the signal felt like hours. I lingered in the shadows of the crowded mansion, my mask doing little to hide the storm of emotions brewing beneath. Rage, anticipation, fear. It was all there, thrumming in my veins as I waited for the chaos to begin. I spotted Lisa again, across the room, laughing with Enrique Valdez himself. She looked comfortable, even intimate, as she leaned closer to him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Seeing her with him made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to stay calm. This would all be over soon. The first sign of the raid was subtle. A few plainclothes officers filtered into the room, mingling with the guests. They were careful not to draw attention, but their presence was unmistakable to me. My heart pounded as I watched them position themselves strategically near exits and key figures, including Enrique. Then came the signal, a high-pitched beep barely audible over the music. Within seconds, the mansion was thrown into chaos. Uniformed officers burst through the main entrance, shouting commands as guests scrambled to escape. Drinks spilled, masks were discarded, and the illusion of sophistication evaporated in an instant. I stayed frozen, watching as Lisa's world crumbled around her. She looked stunned at first, her eyes darting toward Enrique for guidance. But when he bolted toward a back exit, she didn't hesitate to follow. I moved quickly, weaving through the panicked crowd to keep her in sight. The officers hadn't reached the private rooms yet, and I knew Lisa would try to hide until the chaos died down. She and Enrique disappeared down a hallway, and I followed, staying just far enough behind to avoid being noticed. They entered a dimly lit room, and I slipped in behind them, leaving the door slightly ajar. My breath caught as I watched them scramble to pack up stacks of cash, drugs, and other incriminating evidence scattered across the room. This wasn't supposed to happen, Lisa hissed, her voice trembling. "You said your contacts would warn us if something like this was coming." "Shut up and move faster," Enrique snapped, his calm facade cracking. Hearing her panic brought me a grim sense of satisfaction. For the first time, Lisa wasn't in control. She wasn't the one holding the cards. I stepped into the room, my voice cold and steady. "Going somewhere?" They both froze. Lisa turned to face me, her mask slipping off in her haste. Her eyes widened, the color draining from her face. "Mike?" she stammered. What are you doing here?" I removed my mask, letting her see the fury etched across my face. "I could ask you the same thing, Lisa." Enrique's eyes narrowed, and his hand moved toward his jacket. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "Someone you shouldn't have messed with," I replied. Before he could pull whatever was in his jacket, the door burst open, and 2 officers stormed in, guns drawn. "Hands where we can see them," one of them barked. Enrique hesitated, his jaw clenching, but he eventually raised his hands. Lisa, trembling, did the same. Her eyes darted toward me, silently pleading for an explanation. I didn't give her one. Instead, I stepped aside as the officers moved in to cuff both of them. "You set me up?" Lisa whispered, her voice breaking. "How could you do this to me?" I leaned in close, my voice low and venomous. "How could you do this to us?" For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by anger. She opened her mouth to say something, but the officers hauled her out of the room before she could speak. As I watched her being led away, the weight of what I'd just done settled over me. This wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the end of her entire facade. But it wasn't over yet. Enrique Valdez and his empire weren't going down without a fight, and I wasn't done getting justice. The house was chaos as the raid unfolded. Guests were being herded out, cuffed and questioned, while officers cataloged the drugs, cash, and other evidence scattered throughout the mansion. I stayed behind, leaning against the wall of the hallway where Lisa had been arrested, letting the gravity of the moment sink in. Lisa was gone, handcuffed, powerless. The woman who had humiliated and betrayed me now faced consequences she could never escape. The sight of her being hauled out in disgrace would haunt me for a long time, but it also brought a sense of closure. For years, she had made me feel small, like I was the problem. Now, the truth was undeniable. I caught sight of Jake as he walked through the front door, nodding to me as he passed. He stopped briefly to whisper, "Valdez is trying to negotiate. You might want to clear out soon. Things could get messy." Messy. That was an understatement. The man I had just helped bring down wasn't a petty criminal. He was a kingpin. His money, connections, and influence stretched far and wide, and I had no doubt he would try to retaliate against anyone who stood in his way. I left before the last of the guests had been processed, slipping out through the side entrance. The cool night air hit my face, and for a moment, I just stood there, breathing deeply. I should have felt victorious, but instead, I felt hollow. When I got home, the silence was deafening. Lisa's belongings were still scattered throughout the house, her shoes by the door, her coat draped over a chair, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. It felt surreal knowing she wouldn't be coming back. Not after tonight. I grabbed a drink and sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. My mind raced with questions I didn't have answers to. What had pushed her into that world? Was it greed? Boredom? Or was there some darkness in her I'd never seen before? Part of me wanted to hate her, but another part couldn't help but grieve. This wasn't just the death of our marriage. It was the death of the woman I thought I knew. The next morning, the fallout began. News of the raid was all over the media. Headlines screamed about Enrique Valdez's arrest, the illegal dealings uncovered at his mansion, and the prominent figures implicated in the scandal. Lisa's name wasn't mentioned yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. She was too deeply involved to be ignored. I got a call from Jake around noon. "You need to lay low for a while," he said. "Valdez's people will figure out you had a hand in this, and they won't be happy." "I'm not afraid of them," I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. "You should be," Jake said sharply. These people don't just come after you. They come after everything you care about. His words hit harder than I expected. Lisa had betrayed me in ways I couldn't forgive, but the thought of her facing the wrath of Valdez's associates made my stomach turn. For all her faults, she was still human. She didn't deserve to be hurt or worse. What do? I asked, my voice quieter now. Stay out of sight. Don't draw attention to yourself. And if anyone asks, you had no idea what was happening at that mansion. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Got it. Mike, Jake added after a pause, his tone softer now. You did the right thing. It doesn't feel like it right now, but you did. I hung up, but his words lingered in my mind. Had I done the right thing? Or had I just painted a target on my back and hers? Later that evening, the phone rang again. This time it wasn't Jake. It was Lisa. I stared at the screen, her name glowing back at me like a taunt. Against my better judgment, I answered. You ruined everything. She spat the moment I picked up. Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been crying or screaming. You ruined it first, I replied coldly. You think I'm the villain here, Lisa? Look in the mirror. You don't understand, she hissed. I had no choice. Don't you dare blame me, I snapped, cutting her off. You made your choices. You lied. You cheated. You sold yourself to monsters like Valdez, and now you're paying the price. There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. They're coming for me, Mike. You have no idea what you've done. I felt a chill run down my spine. Good luck, I said flatly, then hung up. Her words haunted me long after the call ended. The morning after the raid, I woke to an eerie quiet. It didn't last. By noon, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. It wasn't there before, and it didn't belong to any of my neighbors. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but I could feel eyes on me every time I glanced out the window. Jake had warned me this might happen. Valdez's associates didn't waste time. They'd find me and Lisa sooner than later. By the end of the day, my phone rang again. This time it was an unknown number. I hesitated but answered. We know who you are, a man's voice said, calm but menacing. And we know where you live. The line went dead before I could respond. They weren't bluffing. That night, Lisa called again. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. Mike, she whispered, her voice shaking. You have to help me. They're going to kill me. Her panic was palpable, but I couldn't muster any sympathy. You made your bed, Lisa. Lie in it. You don't understand, she cried. Valdez's people think I set him up. They think I worked with the cops. I paused. The irony wasn't lost on me. Not my problem. You don't get it, she screamed. If they can't get to me, they'll come for you instead. The line went silent, and the weight of her words settled in my chest like a stone. The next day, the black SUV followed me to work. Parked a block away, but the presence was unmistakable. They weren't hiding anymore. Jake called in a panic. Mike, Valdez's people think Lisa snitched. They're not just after her. They think you're involved too. I am involved, I admitted. You don't understand, Jake snapped. They'll burn your life to the ground. You need to disappear. But I wasn't about to run. I was done being the victim. Instead, I drove to the safety deposit box, retrieving the backup files I'd stored. If Valdez's people wanted a fight, I'd give them one, but on my terms. I spent the night compiling everything: emails, financial records, the footage of Lisa at the mansion, and all of Jake's intel on Valdez's operations. By morning, I sent it to the police, several journalists, and even a federal agency. If Valdez's empire was coming after me, I'd burn it down before they could. That afternoon, the black SUV was gone. Instead, my phone buzzed with a text from another unknown number. You've made a mistake. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The trap was set, and the clock was ticking for them, not me. Days passed in tense silence, but I knew it wouldn't last. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. Headlines about leaked evidence tying Valdez to trafficking, drug operations, and money laundering. The authorities had enough to dismantle his entire network. Jake called shortly after. You've put Valdez in a corner. He'll either flee or retaliate. What about Lisa? I asked. She's their scapegoat now, he said grimly. If they find her, she's done. I hung up, feeling no pity. She'd chosen this life, but I wasn't about to be its collateral damage. I started preparing for the inevitable showdown. It happened at night. The sound of shattering glass woke me. 2 masked men breaking into my home. They thought I'd go quietly, but I was ready. The hidden camera footage I had of Lisa and their operation wasn't just evidence, it was insurance. Before they could make a move, I held up a USB drive and said, "Kill me, and this goes public. It's already in the hands of people who won't stop." They hesitated, exchanging glances. Their silence confirmed my gamble had worked. "Tell Valdez," I said, my voice cold. "You've already lost." They left without a word. By morning, news broke of Valdez's arrest as he tried to flee the country. Lisa, however, had disappeared. I didn't care where she went. Her world had crumbled, and I was finally free. The betrayal was over, and I had my life back, even if it wasn't the one I'd envisioned.